Welcome to Section 3, Standard Operating Procedures and Specification Sheets, Constructing Deliberate Practices by Habit Building Protocol. I'm your instructor, Michelle Carmichael. Please download the PDF to follow along during this instructional video. Get ready to apply your states of flow, your maker mindset, and to train your brain to become mechanical-like in nature for performing processes, procedures, and methodology. Now, you will dive into learning how to develop deliberate practices and habit-building protocols mindfully. And this action is based on your prior knowledge of making your products to transform them into higher-order critical thinking skills for reiterative and repetitive practices, aka your standard operating procedures, or your SOPs. Now, your mind will process this as constructive learning, the process of constructively building your foundations towards the development of your standard operating procedures. Now, this is time-consuming, but is a vital component of your GMP binder. And GMP requires that your SOPs are detailed, precise, and accurate. So be prepared to spend some time writing out your processes. Now, the external resources I've compiled for you are on the methods, techniques, and theories of constructivism, deliberate practices, and habit building towards your change in behavioral performance. Explore these resources with an open mind to welcome the change in your behavior and what that change will entail by your actions. Now, like a light switch, implementing protocol turns on when you enter your operating platform and turns off when you exit. And this mindset of deliberate practices should be put into action since your operating platform is your home. Now, a change of your behavior habits occur when your operating hat is on, and your schedule for your operations should not sway when making products. So make sure others in your home are aware that it is product making time and they need to abide by your protocols as well. And just because your operating platform is your home, you should not steer from the protocols that you put in place. The learning outcomes for Section 3 are: 1. You will clarify your product's process from start to finish and implement your process into your SOP. 2. You will connect and structure GMP to your product's process. 3. You will design and construct both your SOP and your spec sheets for your GMP binder. 4. You will produce effective and efficient procedures of your product's process by performing deliberate practices. Now, these learning outcomes are based on scaffolding your action learning throughout the dissection and reconstruction of your showcase product for your GMP binder. And the core concepts for Section 3 are performing deliberate practices by applying a constructive mindset towards critical thinking and behavioral habit building will encourage the validity of your SOP for your GMP guidelines. And GMP requires that your SOPs are justified by your actions. So therefore, when your operating hat is on, it is on. So what are standard operating procedures? Well, your SOPs are your standardized processes that you develop by practice. It is detailed and concise with precise measurements and directions for reproduction. Now, the purpose of a clear SOP is: 1, the assurance that your products are correctly and consistently made. This means that you have developed a consistent protocol for your recipe, that you make it the same way each time. 2, the uniformity and quality performance outcomes throughout your product's production. Now, this means that your procedures are uniform, resulting in a quality outcome each time you make your products. 3, yourself and or your staff or helpers uphold the responsible accountability guidelines. This means that you and or your staff or helpers are aware of your protocols and have knowledge of the behavior of your product's processes. Now, GMP requires that you must develop a documented SOP for your records. Now, the beauty of the SOPs is that it's your process. Each phase must be carefully dissected, broken into subphases from start to finish. So actively take notes and write down your processes when you are actually making your products. Now, this is easier said than done, as we all know that sometimes we cannot multitask while we are in product making mode. So ask someone to be your observer or your note taker. Or you can video your process and jot down your notes later. But you must keep track of time and record timestamps during your phases. A helpful hint when writing your SOPs is looking at this document as if you were to make it for the first time. The reader must understand the process and how to replicate it without any questions or confusions. And GMP requires that you have a very detailed SOP. So therefore, you will put much time and energy into creating a full-bodied SOP for every product that you make. Now, in your GMP binder, you will have an SOP log that lists every SOP for every product. Your SOP log is documented by date and in version history, in chronological order by the name of each product. Now, you must keep your SOP section very organized. The purpose of an SOP log is to keep track of your SOPs like a table of contents of all of your SOPs. So look at the example chart I provided. Make sure your documents state which version, and in your SOP log, you need to match up the version history to the order of your SOPs. This sounds confusing, but once you get it structured, you will understand better. GMP requires an SOP log for accuracy of your product version history. And your version history provides clarity for your products when your ingredients are changed or for whatever reason. Now, you might make a batch without essential oils or a batch substituting another ingredient. And GMP requires that your version history is clearly documented in order to match your SOP and your SOP log. So, for example, you are making version 3 of your candles. You know that in your SOP log, you need to find the SOP version 3 to make your candles by. And that SOP should be the third clump of SOPs in your SOP section. Now, some advice is to paperclip each section together to separate them, or put them in sheet protectors, or divide them somehow for clarity and easy access. So, how do you write an SOP? We'll use the example I created for you as a template to get started. Now, then look at your showcase product and break down its process. I will highlight the key points in this video. So first, you need to define a few things before you actually write your process down. One is your purpose. State what your SOP is for. Now, it's short, concise, and lists what is included in your SOP. For example, this SOP is for the production of your product name from start to finish. Now, this SOP includes the recipe, the prep, the tools needed, the production, the cleanup, and the packaging of a tester batch or a full batch of your product's name. Next is the scope. The scope is a clear definition of your procedural processes. What is and what is not included in your process. For example, this SOP should be used for every batch of your product name that is in production per count number batch. Now, when reading your scope, if anything is left to question, then your scope is not complete. Next is your responsibility. And this allows the reader to familiarize themselves with your product before making it. For example, it's the responsibility of you or your staff to use this SOP as a guide and checklist for procedures of your product name. So think of this as writing out an agreement to comply with. Next is listing your materials and equipment. Now, for your master recipe, You can list them here since it's such a small batch or a tester batch, and your list will not be that long. But for larger batches, it is easier to state see spec sheet for your product or see your spec sheet for your packaging. And this means that in this section, you have a spec sheet, and that will be included in this section only. Now we'll cover spec sheets in the next few slides coming up. Next, you will now begin your instructional process for making your products in phases. Start with phase A, your operational process. Now you must start from the beginning, your process for prepping your ingredients, gathering your materials and equipment, setting up shop, and completing a checklist. Proceed steps B through Z in order of your product process. Now take your time writing your protocol. You might have phases that extend to A.A through Z.Z, and that is okay. But you must format your instructional process by every single phase that you perform. This is why I suggest having a helper take your notes. They can keep track of time, record the timestamps, and make observations as you are making your products. Now, if you do choose to video or record your process, you need to make sure that you do record the time of each phase. So GMP requires that your phases are accurately time-stamped for every reproduction, and if anything goes haywire, then you are aware and you can take notes of that. Now the next heading is quality control. And here is where you will pay special attention to the details of your recipe outcomes. You need to state which phases need special attention, specific procedures, etc. Such as every phase of your product is checked throughout the process for quality from start to finish, and particular detail is needed during phases, say C through F, as your product must be carefully observed and recorded for optimal performance. Now, our next section is quality control. So you will learn more about quality control, and then you can add it to this section heading later. Next is your reporting and recording. Here is where you state the results of your process. So what do you do if problems arise? How do you handle them? State here that if you follow your SOP correctly, then you will produce the desired results. The next heading is cleanup. Now document your cleaning process. Be very detailed in your steps. For example, the cleanup is performed after this phase or during that phase, and do not leave anything out of your cleaning and sanitizing processes. The next heading is your reference documents. Here you can say, see attached documents for references to your product, and this includes any SOPs that are relevant to your product's process, reference as equipment or materials, supplies, etc. Now you will need to state specifically what reference document you are talking about. Now you can include pictures and of your setup and your prepping materials or any other resources that you use for your product's process. And this also gives you a visual of your procedures. Now lastly is your revision history. Now this is kept at the very end of your SOP document. You should create a chart for accuracy. Sometimes our revisions turn out to be the best batches of our products, and you need to record and make sure that your chart has its correct revisions. Now, this also includes listing the ingredients in your products that you did not make, but you also need to include them because without those ingredients, your products would be incomplete. So for example, your recipe calls for an extract. Did you make that extract or did you purchase it ready-made? If you made the extract, then the extract that you made needs its very own SOP. But if you purchase the extract ready-made, then you need to list the spec sheet into your SOP. Now, this is imperative that you include all of your documented notes in your SOPs, and this is going to be a very long paper trail. but each product could have many pages of documents that need to be organized and written in a way that you can follow. So when you're flipping through your GMP binder, you need to make sure you understand and know where everything is at. If you were to be inspected by GMP, then you need to present them with a fully verified process that is traceable right back to its origins. And here we are at spec sheets or specification sheets. Now your spec sheets contain the exact detailed requirements that your ingredients and materials must have in order to meet your criteria for using them in your products. This is your bottom line for quality, a reflection of your integrity, and reasoning for choosing those ingredients. Now you must create and format your spec sheet document, or you can find a template that meets the needs of your platform. I provided you with an example, and it's very basic. So when you're writing up your spec sheet from scratch, you must include these required headings. But also, when using a blended ready-made item, use the spec sheet from your vendor. And you must also state that you are using a spec sheet from your vendor. And your vendor should also provide you with the necessary paperwork. If not, then I would be pretty cautious of that vendor. You need to be aware of who you get your materials from. Now, all of your vendors should provide you with either a certificate of analysis or a verified certificate for distribution. And this allows you to know that they, as a vendor, have taken the necessary precautions to providing a quality service to their customers. Now, when writing your spec sheets, your product criteria is very important to document by GMP guidelines. And this usually is the legalities and the consumer safety regulations about your ingredients. So you start with critical. Now, this is where you describe the consumer safety legal requirements, such as it's negative for E. coli and salmonella. But you must use your supplier's spec sheets, and they should have this legal documentation that you need. The next is the major criteria. Describe what could affect the product quality that would not meet specifications. If it's food grade, its particle size, if it's water resistant, etc. Again, use your supplier's spec sheets. Lastly is the minor criteria. Now, these are your ideal specifications, not adversely affecting your final product if your ingredient has a high clarity or color potency, but again, use your vendor spec sheets. The next heading is your ingredients. Now, you will list the ingredient by its size purchased, such as you purchase 1 pound or 5 pounds. And if it's a botanical, you must include its Latin name. Next is your approved suppliers. And here you will list the supplier of your vendor that you procure your specific ingredients from. Next is your ingredient declaration. List here your blended bases and use your vendor's spec sheet. It is very important that you keep a close eye on your ingredient declarations. Vendors do modify their blends, and you will need to keep track of their changes, as this could affect your final product's outcome. The next heading is your reference documentation. Now list here any documentation that is applicable to your spec sheet, including your certificate analysis of your ingredients or any other verification documents. And lastly is your revision history. You need to make sure you list any changes to your recipe ingredients. Say if you're using a sister botanical, like between lavender and lavandin, and note any changes from your suppliers for your products. You can create a chart or a format that's easy for you to understand and keep track of. Now, your spec sheet is similar to your SOP by its headings, but your spec sheet requires you to do some detective work and to gather materials and paperwork from your vendor or your supplier, like their spec sheets, their COAs, locating their product criteria. Here you really need to take your time and be diligent in your investigations. GMP guidelines require that every ingredient in your spec sheet is traceable back to its origin. Now also you will have a spec log sheet, and your spec log contains all of your spec sheets to keep track of all of your incoming items in chronological order. Now this is the first page of your spec sheet section, and it is formatted much like your SOP log, a table that you create for your spec sheet inventory. Now when you're receiving your incoming items, you must visually inspect each item. You need to verify it meets the integrity of your supplier's description statements. If something is off, then you must record this in your spec sheet. This includes the shipping and receiving inspection that you will perform for each item when you receive it, checking it off its packing list. You must make sure that it meets your quality standards. Now your spec log keeps track of all incoming items, so you should also take notice of those items that take a while to ship out and for you to receive. If you decide to make a product without it, then you must go through the process of locating your SOP version history for any substitutions. Now your spec log must be kept current, same as your SOP log. If your vendors change vendors, then you must take note of this. Bottom line, you must follow the paper trail and create one of your own in order to meet GMP requirements for your GMP binder. And remember, GMP does require that every ingredient or material must be traced back to its place of origin. Now, I know that was a lot of information to take in and to absorb. Read the resources I provided you on deliberate practices and habit building. You will learn how to apply knowledge acquisition when you're developing your SOPs. Now, knowledge acquisition means that you know your process. You know its terminology, its materials, its ingredients, its timeline, and you are confident in performing your process, and you know the behavior of its processes. Now, you're putting in place your protocol, and that takes dedication in performing deliberate practices towards behavior habit building. It requires metacognitive critical thinking and decision making. And this is the most intense part of cognitively learning how to design and develop your SOP. This is where you fine-tune your showcase product's process. So now look at your showcase product for your GMP binder. Can you see the connection to GMP? Can you visually construct your product's process while examining your product? Now I've created for you a flow map to construct the architecture of your SOP. Now use this flow map to construct your process and to navigate through writing the phases of your SOPs and your spec sheets. So first, take your showcase product and then dissect it from its processes from start to finish. Place your phases in chunks for an easier understanding, and then you will be able to see how it flows. Second, connect your product to GMP. You want to structure your SOP outline towards GMP practices and its guidelines. Third, begin the construction of your product's SOP. So align GMP to your process by its phases. Fourth, start designing your spec sheets. If you haven't yet, then determine your requirements for every ingredient, material, supplies, or equipment that you use. Now, some of your written work will become a copy and paste situation, and that will streamline your writing process. Now, lastly, design both your SOP and spec logs. You will notice a large connection between how to organize and structure your logs in your SOPs and when you need to state, quote, see this or see that, unquote, in your SOPs or in your spec sheets. Create your maker mindset and flow states around being structurally organized and methodological. Draw in your deliberate practices by behavioral habit building while your operating hat is on and while you are writing. And you have now completed Section 3 instructional video. Now remember, this is your product's process. It doesn't matter how long it is, but you just need to include all of your steps for every single phase. Even if you go past A through Z and you develop an A.A through Z.Z, you need to label each phase clearly. Answer every heading with integrity, and don't be afraid to state clearly your quality requirements. Now, at the end of this section, please answer the questions using the PDF that I have provided for you. And as always, please reach out to me if you have any additional questions. And this presentation was designed in Canva. All the content was written by me, Michelle Carmichael. The flow map was also created by me, Michelle Carmichael. And all of the audio was narrated by me, Michelle Carmichael. Thank you so very much.